It is about rebuilding relationships, trusting relationships. And as we all know, as we try to focus more on our justice system on the impact of stress and trauma, restorative justice is a more trauma-informed approach than the traditional process, and that's important. Next slide. So then, if you look at the traditional process and you look at restorative practices, how do they compare? So first, instead of a criminal act, viewing a criminal act as simply a violation of laws or statutes or ordinances, restorative justice sees that act as a violation of people and relationships. Relationships are really important in this sense of the word. Restorative justice seeks to examine the harmful impact of crime and then determine what can be done to repair that harm. And you're going to hear the word repair the harm a lot when I speak, as well as when Justice Geske speaks to you all next week. Repairing that harm while holding the person who caused it accountable. And accountability, right, means more than just punishment. It means more than just go do some services. It means more than I'll just see you once as a judge and then I'll just wait till you come back. Accountability for the offender means accepting responsibility and, again, repairing that harm. So the outcomes we want is we want to see the harm repaired. In terms of children's court and what I wanted to see for kids like Kendrick, I wanted to understand the reasons for his offense. Is it just this silly acting out, you know, their brains aren't developed till they're 26, or is there something deeper going on so that we can address it at that level? And what I want to see come out of restorative practices, if at all possible, is that we're going to reduce the likelihood of reoffending. I don't want to see him back. I want to see him on the street where he comes up to me and says, "Hey, Judge T, thank you. You know, this is what I'm doing with my life. I went to school, I did this, I did that." Restorative justice also seeks to center victims. It is not a process that's necessarily focused on the offender. And that's different for the justice system, right? Because it's usually the state versus whomever, right? And the state is responsible for everything, and we rarely see victims come in. This sort of turns that on the edge, thank you, and we want to center the victim. And I think that's really important, centering the victim as we look at all of the things we do in terms of public safety, right? Victims need a voice. Victims need to be part of the process. They need to talk with us about what the harm was. And what's really important is that the community plays a really key role. They play a key role in setting standards of conduct. They play a key role in helping support the offender in repairing the harm. They play a really key role in lifting a victim and supporting the victim. And the community could be all of you. It could be a small community, it could be a larger community, but it could be you. And so those are the differences that I see between the traditional system, both in the criminal justice and juvenile justice, but it can certainly be applied in different settings, and I'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about the Family Drug Treatment Court and the Healthy Infant Court. So now let's see how we can take those principles, that philosophy, and apply it to what happened to Kendrick. And I'm going to ask you to flip the next slide, please. Thank you. So remember the 3 questions? Just because I only have a half hour, I'm not going to ask you to repeat them back to me, so I'll just tell you what they are. See if you remember. So the 3 traditional questions are, who committed the crime, right? What laws were broken? And how are we going to punish the offender? 3 different questions that restorative justice asks. It asks who was harmed, what was the harm, and what are we going to do to work to repair the harm, right? So when I was my first go around at Children's Court, the District Attorney's Office and a variety of others were doing victim offender panels. And we would do it for property crime offenses. That's where we started, right? And Kendrick's was a property crime offense. And so Kendrick would come to Children's Court, and there was a room, conference room off, and then we would have people who were from the community, but people also who could describe harm that was committed. And the one time when Kendrick came in, the victim, the owner of the auto dealership, was actually there. He asked to be a participant in it rather than other people who understand crime and those kinds of things, but weren't directly involved with the youth. But the auto dealership man came because he wanted to see if this restorative justice was what it was built up to be. So we all sat around in a room, and there were other community members as well to help support the process. And we told stories. And storytelling is a really unique aspect of restorative justice. In fact, that's where people get to tell how they feel, how they've been impacted. What's the ripple effect of what went on? It's not just, hey, you slashed some tires and you broke some windows, but it goes farther than that when you hear about the ripple effects of harm. And you don't hear that in the traditional system. So the owner described his horror the morning when he came to work, seeing the damage to the property, and he was pretty graphic about it. He had to shut down the dealership. Again, it was a small dealership. He had to send employees home. They couldn't work that day. There was nothing to do. They could help clean up, but one employee had a brand new baby at home, and that's his only job he had. And so for the time he was off, he had to figure out how to feed that child, right, and that family. His wife didn't work because she was, I believe at that point, she was pregnant again. So one worker, you saw the ripple effect of what happened to that individual. Excuse me. Is there down there? You're so sweet. That's water, thank you. Thanks, appreciate it. The owner recounted to Kendrick how he had to grapple with the insurance company. Who finds that fun, right? Till he was moved by the story of the employee that went home and didn't have a job and, was struggling to feed his family. And so he opened up and he started to talk about his mom losing her job when he was younger and the impact of that on him and his siblings. The fact that they had to pick up everything they had in their home or their apartment and move to a smaller apartment where there was only one bedroom and they all slept in that bedroom. He understood what it meant to have an inability to make ends meet. And so as he recounted this, you could tell that the storytelling was really impactful on him. And then usually what happens at the end of a restorative justice event like that is that everyone tries to figure out how are we going to repair the harm, right? And so what ultimately happened is that the owner of the dealership employed Kendrick. He had to come every day after school, couldn't play basketball, he had to come to the shop, he had to clean from the day before, he had to wash all the cars, even if they weren't dirty. But it was a pact between the owner of the shop and Kendrick to do this. And later on, I heard he actually employed him and started paying him to do some work there. So they had created a bond and a new relationship. That wasn't going to happen in the traditional system as we know it. So those are the things that we look for when trying to figure out how to use restorative justice principles and practices in the juvenile justice system. And we should be using more of it, and we will as soon as I get there and we start looking at how to increase the work that we do and ask the students to help be part of that, the law students, But that's an important thing. So what is the hope in using restorative justice for offenders like Kendrick is that we hope we help them understand the implications of the crime. It's not just about pleading guilty and then doing some probation and walking through services and then recycling through the system. We hope that when they come face to face with their victim or victims or those who have been impacted by crime, that it leaves an impression on them like it did Kendrick. And we hope that they become reconnected to their community and want to give back, because that's really important. I do believe it helps build healthier relationships, certainly the relationship between Kendrick and the owner of the dealership. And my biggest thing for Children's Court, I hope it decreases the opportunity for further criminal behavior. And at least for Kendrick, and I only followed him for a short period of time, that was the case for him. So those are one of our success stories. And that's one way I like, by using an example to describe what we can do there. So I'm going to pause there for a minute. You can go to the next slide. There's all sorts of ways you can use restorative justice. Ours was a victim offender panel at Children's Court. Circles or circle conferencing is really key. That's what happens, and that's what I participated in at the Green Bay Correctional Institution. There's offender reentry circles that are happening where we just usually focus on the offender. Victims not there, community might be there. And there's other ways to do it. One other way that we have used restorative practices is in the treatment court. So I'm going to shift to that real quick so that we can have a conversation before I bring up our guest speakers. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. Thank you. 5 minutes? I can do this in 5. So I'm going to briefly discuss the Family Drug Treatment Court as another way in which stakeholders, judges, lawyers, community folks, and others have moved away from the traditional system because it doesn't get us the results that we think we need to have to help families and individuals succeed in the justice system. And so the Family Drug Treatment Court was created about, I want to say, 12 to 15 years ago. And it followed a practice that had been happening across the country, where there was adult drug treatment courts that came from the criminal division, or the criminal justice system. We wanted to use that in our child welfare system. And so we started to look across the country at their practices and best practices, and we created the first family drug treatment court in the state in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, at Children's Court, handling child welfare matters. And what it is Family Drug Treatment Court is really a voluntary program. You can go to the next slide. For parents whose children have been removed from their care because of a substance use disorder. And it is a team approach. It's not like the traditional system where I sit on the bench and I'm going to tell the parent the 25 things they need to do, and then they got to go out and figure out how to do it, and then they come back in and they tell me whether they've done what they were supposed to do, and there's not a lot of support. Family Drug Treatment Court turned that on its head. It became a team approach model where the parents were part of the team. And the judge and the lawyers and everyone had to understand that substance use is a disease. Not that you're not going to hold a parent accountable. They have to be able to safely parent their child in their home before we return their children back to their care. But we wrapped an enormous amount of services and healthy relationships and love around them so that they could succeed. Some didn't, but many, many more succeeded in getting their children back in their care. Participants had to commit to a 4-phase program. Robin and Janisha, I think, got stuck in phase 2 for a while. You didn't talk about that. We provide them family-centered clinical services, a recovery support coordinator. We help them build healthy relationships. Sometimes that means they couldn't go back to their family until they became strong enough because their family was helping them use. And we used restorative practices in the family drug treatment court. We built community and healthy relationships. We used storytelling to discern the harm, and we tried to help them, and they tried to help us repair the harm. So that, in a nutshell, is the Family Drug Treatment Court. We've had significant successes. Two are sitting here today. Both Janisha and Robin were successful graduates. Next slide. The Healthy Infant Court was part and parcel of the Family Drug Treatment Court, and it followed the national model for safe baby courts that started to grow, and basically it was a focus, you can go to the next slide, it was focusing on infants to 3 years old and trying to support their neural development by providing them with a safe space, a foster parent. That foster parent would then work with the parent to try to help the birth parent succeed. But the focus was on the infant and trying to make that infant stronger and increase relational health with the infant. And there's a lot more to it. I'm not going to go into those things because I really do want you to hear from our panelists. But both the Family Drug Treatment Court and the Healthy Infant Court have met with some amazing successes, including return of infants to parental care soon after they're removed with supportive services. And what we believed is that using restorative practices within the treatment courts really made them better and really helped us support parents and families work to build community on a much higher level. So I am going to now introduce, Janisha doesn't want to go first. You're not going to go first. I won't make you go first. Since I did a lot of work around the restorative justice in the criminal justice system, I think I'm going to have Adam Purcell go first. And I'm going to let him tell you his story. But Adam and I have become good friends. I'm amazed by some of the things that he's been doing in the community to help folks who are coming out of prison re-enter. He's got some high hopes and high plans, and he has made some really good connections in the community to help support his work. And I'm going to introduce to you Adam Purcell.
All right, good evening. I'm a soft speaker, so you might have some trouble hearing me, so just yell at me if you do not hear me. She's already yelling at me, so I'm gonna need some volume probably. So I feel I've been given an impossible task of explaining restorative justice to those that maybe have never heard the concept. And it's interesting because it's just 2 words, right? They're not difficult words to say, and it's, 18 letters? Like, what could be so special about 2 words and 18 letters? And in 14 minutes and 36 seconds now, how do I explain to you that were it not for restorative justice, I wouldn't be standing here speaking to you now? Or in 14 minutes and 12 seconds now, how would I explain to you that I would be on the wrong side of the grass beyond not just speaking to you? I wouldn't be alive today if restorative justice did not exist. And so to try to understand why restorative justice means so much to me, I have to take you back to a very difficult place, a place that's probably going to lead most, if not all of you, to not like me very much. And I'm very cognizant of that fact. But I feel I have to be honest, and like a Band-Aid, I'll just rip it off and begin. And there's a reason why I start so young. Because I hurt somebody when I was very young. And I feel like I didn't grow up as a bad kid. In fact, I was an honor roll student, a Boy Scout. I played 2 instruments, was a member of the Young Astronauts program. Essentially, everything you want in a child. up until the age of 14 when I moved to Milwaukee. And within a matter of months, I went from this really, really good kid to surrounding myself with the friends that parents don't want their kids to associate with, because I couldn't deal with the loneliness of being the new kid in class. And it's no excuse, but just my mindset at the time. I feel I'm hunched over. And here I am, a soon-to-be 15-year-old, hanging out with the bad crowd being gang members. And I was told by this older crowd that I wanted so badly to impress that it's up to you to protect, I'm a gang member now, our neighborhood. And if you get into trouble, the justice system, they won't punish you because you're a juvenile. Slap on the wrist. And I bought into this. And 3 days after I turned 15 years old, I picked up a gun, I pointed it at rival gang members, and I, along with another adult, shot at rival gang members, and unfortunately 2 people were hit, and one of these individuals did not survive. And this was in 1995, kind of a get tough on crime wave for juvenile suspects, kind of like what we're seeing now. And I went to trial and was found guilty, deservedly so, because I have no excuses. And I was sentenced to life in prison. And I don't have, as odd as it sounds, any problem with that sentence, because my actions dictated that that's in fact what I wanted. I would have said something to the opposite of that effect had you asked me at the time, but looking back, that's exactly, I got what I wanted. And so I became the youngest inmate in the adult prison system at 5'1", maybe 110 pounds, no facial hair. A lot of the youth prisons that exist today didn't exist back then. And so I was constantly trying to prove that I wasn't a little 15, 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old kid in the adult prison system where everybody was bigger, stronger, wiser. And I got into a lot of trouble. And I would end up paying for that trouble in prison by being sent to solitary confinement for 4 consecutive years. And there's a misnomer that people find God in prison. The implication there is that God is lost and we find him in prison. But given the place where I speak now, I think it's only fair to say that we are lost, and not to get religious on you, but I feel that's where God finds us, or me in this case. In my and I didn't hear voices from heaven or anything like that. But I felt a concept of you tried it your way and you suck. And so I did. I renounced my gang affiliation, and I dedicated my life to trying to keep kids from ending up like me. So it would take a couple of years to dig myself out of the hole that I had dug, because for whatever reason, the warden didn't want to believe that I had suddenly turned over a new leaf overnight. I don't know why he didn't want to believe that. But in another 3 years, I was sent back down to a maximum security prison where I would obtain my high school equivalency diploma, started embarking on college correspondence courses. I would start writing a book, and I would start speaking with thousands of youth brought into the prison system. And never once did I tell a youth to get out of a gang or don't join a gang, because as soon as you start telling teenagers what to do, they start doing the opposite. So I would say, if you want to be like me, let me show you vividly what that looks like. And so I'm getting to the most important part of this. For good behavior, I was sent down to medium security prison and continued to get involved with youth brought into the prison system, started to work with law enforcement on the inside to try to help eradicate gangs in various communities while still incarcerated. And then I was entered into a program called the Victim Impact Program. And it was the first time I heard of restorative justice. Those 2 words, those 18 letters again. And I was doing all of these positive things during the day, so much so that the Milwaukee Journal did a story on my positive anti-gang work from behind bars. And yet at night in my prayers, I was literally asking God to not let me wake up tomorrow. Because for anybody that's ever signed a contract when they've bought in a car, that all that fine print that nobody reads. There's also fine print to when you hurt somebody. When I picked up that gun and pointed it, nobody allowed me the opportunity to read the fine print of guilt. And so it was guilt that was literally begging me to not wake up in my prayers. And a couple days after this article was published, because there's two parallel things going on at the same time. I'm in the victim impact program where they bring victims of most crimes into the prison system, starting with theft, to armed robbery, to sexual assault, to murder. That's going on in parallel. I'm praying, God, begging, do not let me wake up, to I'm coming back one day from work detail and my name is checked for mail. The best thing that ever could happen to somebody in prison, because that means somebody took the time to say, you matter. And it was my victim's father. It was his name that was on the return address. And time kind of stopped for me, because believe it or not, I wanted that letter to tell me what a piece of trash that I was, that he hoped that I died in prison, that he hoped that I rotted for what I had done, because that's what the guilt within me wanted to hear. In the victim impact program, it got to the homicide victim portion. And this man came in and he put a big picture on the wall of his daughter who was murdered. And as he started to describe what had happened to her, I realized that I was on the tier with the individual that killed his daughter. And it was the first time I saw, as he started to cry and my own tears fell, the pain that I had caused. My victim's father's letter now. He didn't tell me that he hated me. He didn't say that I hope you rot in prison. He said, thank you for what you're doing in my son's name. Thank you. And it may be an odd thing to remember, but all I could think of is, here's the man writing his son's killer, and he's grabbing a blank envelope. He doesn't know my address, so he has to look that up. And as he's writing the A, the D, the A, the M, finding my inmate number, knowing that he's going to say thank you. How can somebody do that? I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't deserve forgiveness. What type of human being has the strength to say thank you to someone who took his son's life? Could you do that? Could I do that? I don't know that I could. But it changed my prayers that night from, please God, do not let me wake up tomorrow, to, please help me do this work better. A couple of days later, I got a letter from his mother saying, can we send you some books? How can we help you be more effective so that others don't suffer like we did? And after a few months, I decided to write him back. And in my letter, I said, this is going to sound very unusual, I said, I will never say that I'm sorry to you, which sounds like a terrible thing to say. But I went on to explain that I won't say that I'm sorry because you say I'm sorry for denting somebody's car or spilling milk. You don't say I'm sorry for taking your son's life. I said, I will show you with my actions until I take my final breath that I regret that decision more than anything else I've ever regretted in my entire life. And I will work until I can work no longer to show you that I regret that moment. And then maybe then, someday, you will know that I'm sorry. And so years and years would pass, and we would create a friendship. And he would start writing to the parole board every single year, essentially begging for my release, saying that he could be so much more effective in the community, in society, if given a chance. Those 18 letters, I'm not laughing because it's funny, I'm laughing to try to stop from crying. Like, how can I convey that I wouldn't be here? That so much of what I do now all stems back to those 18 letters. And after a quarter century in prison, I was given that opportunity to be released in 2018. And I'm actually going to go see him next month for the first time. And I don't know what I'm going to say to him. I don't know if there are words that I can say. I've spent these last 4 years probably running myself into the ground, trying to show this man with my actions that I regret those decisions. 18 letters. And I'll kind of close with, not only did those 18 letters save my life, but, God's a comedian. He says, you know what I'm going to have you do with most of your time? I'm going to put you in community, in circles with those that view you as the enemy and who a lot of you view as the enemy, and that's police officers, law enforcement. So much of my work now involves bringing police officers and the formerly incarcerated to the same table to eat together, to humanize one another, to understand the mindset of one another, of what goes on during a traffic stop. And we're the only prisoner reintegration organization that I know of that gives police officers a standing ovation when they come. I just came from the police academy. I speak to every class of recruits that come through the academy, and it's processed now that they have to come eat with us before they ever get their gun and badge. Because if we can see one another as human beings, it's that much harder to hurt one another, regardless of the side that you're on. And so almost all my work now, again, restoring the trust that's been broken with the community via law enforcement. And so I don't know if I use those 15 minutes wisely to help you get to an understanding of what those letters mean to me, but I challenge you to just really take a deep dive. Come next week, hear from Janine. How powerful, how impactful, how restorative justice can be to making our community a safer place. Thank you.
Let's see if it sounds better.
Make me stand up?
Yes.
Can you guys hear me? No? Yes? Now? Okay, can you hear me? No. Then it's not. Hello? Hello?
Try this one.
Yeah, can you hear me? Oh, okay. I'm Robin Ellis. I work at Meta House as the Recovery Community Coordinator. I'm also a graduate of Meta House. I went through their residential, their outpatient, and their housing program, and I am a graduate of Family Drug Treatment Court, 2014. So just to give you a little background, first I just want to thank the people that I'm sharing the stage with. These stories and the work that the people on the stage have done is phenomenal. I'm grateful to be able to sit here and also do work right beside you all. Adam, your story was super touching. I'm just processing it still, I think a little bit. I appreciated that you said, you weren't a bad kid, and I guess I've never started my own story saying that. There's parts of me that grew up in a very broken home that is still healing. So to think of myself that I wasn't a bad kid, I loved reading, I loved my family, I loved being a part of. But my family was really broken. I grew up in an alcoholic home. Both my parents were addicts and alcoholics, and that's really just what I saw growing up. A lot of abuse, a lot of neglect, a lot of drug use. And so a lot of my very first memories were trauma-filled. And I tried to push that aside because as a child, I just wanted to go to school, right? I just wanted to be loved, and so that's just what I tried to do. And then my environment got the best of me, and the biggest solution that I saw that was in front of me was to join what the people around me were doing. The first time I took a drink, I was 11. I was with my mother and one of my sisters, and I hated it. I hated what it had done to my family, and I didn't like what it felt like, but like I said, I joined what was going on around me. I couldn't beat it, so I joined it. And that just, throughout all of my teenage years turned into more use. By the time I was 15, I was addicted to pills. I was in an abusive relationship of my own with a man who became the father of my child, who was also addicted to drugs. And when I was 18, I found out I was pregnant. I graduated high school. I decided to keep the baby. And 3 weeks after I had her, my mom suddenly passed away. My mom and I didn't have a great relationship. She showed me a lot of unhealthy and dysfunctional ways to live, but because of the trauma I had endured growing up, and I guess the feelings of wishing that at some point she would have gotten better, it hurt. It hurt a lot to know that I had just become a mom and then I lost my mom. And my solution, as it always had been, was to use. And I remember the moment that they drove away with her body, I got in my car with my 3-week-old baby and I drove to my drug dealer's house. And I used. And I numbed because I didn't know how to feel, I didn't know how to face reality, and it had been what I had always done. My drug use just continued. I had gotten into some trouble with the law as far as theft, and then eventually I got an OWI. And just as I was listening to Judge Triggiano's, information about, the traditional law, and when I got pulled over and received an OWI, they took my daughter from the car and took her to my grandma's house, arrested me, and had I not gotten bailed out within a few days, they would have, CPS would have gotten involved further and taken my daughter away. My sister had bailed me out, and CPS did 6 months of checkups, and it was really just random. They didn't ask a lot of questions. They just kind of popped in and like, okay, you're okay, everybody's okay, and just kept moving. It was probably about 7 months after that my father passed away. And so when I was 20 years old, my daughter was 1.5 years, my dad passed away. And so it was just a lot of, again, more trauma on top of trauma and just not dealing with it. I had a point in my life or what that looked like. And my family didn't really have the skills either at that point. My sister, however, did work for CPS, and she realized that the only kind of intervention was to call CPS, basically. So my daughter turned 4. They took her from the home. CPS had gotten involved, a few times from the DUI, and then my sister calling, and there was some other calls in between. Not knowing how to live life normally is hard enough, but then to have that one thing that gave you meaning kind of ripped away from you is a whole different story. So I remember feeling a lot of anger, a lot of frustration. I was mad at my sister for calling CPS. I was mad at my grandma for telling my sister what I had been doing. All the things that people who are not addicts don't understand. And I was, I had a lot of moments where I was screaming for help but not saying anything. And I can look back today and say that moment saved my life, but it was one of the hardest moments of my life. It was traumatic for the whole family. Family drug treatment court was an option right away. And, I didn't have a lot of run-in with the law, but enough to know that when I presented in court, that it was gonna, I felt like it was gonna feel really official and I was gonna be judged. And so, of course, I was scared. Thank you. And I remember going to court and having people, like I remember being brought into a room before I went into court and just talked to like a normal human being. And I had a guard up, of course. You know, I was young, I was 23, and I hadn't really trusted people as it was. And so, you know, to have these like questions being asked of, you know, like, and just the program explained to me, just being treated like a human was really, it was weird for me at first. And then the approach of having a team was a huge thing for me to be able to learn how to trust people in general. I think back, and I was, as Judge Triggiano was talking about, you know, that the questions that are asked, and that's always something I always remember was when I came into the courtroom, they said, "What happened to you?" Not "What did you do?" You know, "Why did this?" It was "What happened to you?" And I was like, "Gosh, I've never even thought of the answer to that question." You know, and at that moment, of course, it's like, I mean, a lot has happened to me, you know, where do I even begin? And that was, you know, that point of like, just the difference, you know, where it's like, this is what we really want for you is to heal, you know, and the restorative justice piece that I think about when I think about family drug treatment court is the restoring the family. And that was so prominent for my whole family to understand that really pretty quickly. My sister and my grandma both, they were on board with the support that I received, but also that we all received as a family. I went into residential treatment pretty quickly, and I didn't do so great the first time around. I did 90 days in a residential treatment, and didn't make many other changes. I kind of just went, you know, with the flow of it. I turned around, got out, and relapsed. And I remember, though, going to court every week, and that was the thing, too, is like, when you're first in court, you're like, gosh, we have to go every week. And it makes a huge difference, right? Because it's now I see, like, that consistency where you're learning about what yourself, your team, and you're working together. And, you know, even when I wasn't doing so great, I would show up. And so having that team, professional, legal team, sit there and see, like, okay, Robin might be under the influence today. And they wouldn't kick me out. They wouldn't turn me away. They wouldn't lock me up. They wouldn't say, well, now you're definitely not getting your kid back. None of those things were ever said to me. I would sit in the courtroom. I'd even have a lawyer come up to me and be like, are you okay? You know, what are your plans for this weekend? You know, are you safe to get home today? And I was like, whoa, every time I was like, what? But I would come back because of that. I was learning more about myself and what I needed every single time a person would say, are you okay? Instead of, what's wrong with you? I got back into residential treatment the second time I went to Maida House. I stayed for 6 months, you know, continued to go to court every week, and, you know, just build the relationships with my team. You know, Judge Triggiano was a huge part of that for me, because I remember, you know, I've had relationships are really hard for me, intimate relationships, and so I would try to hide that, because I knew that when I would, you know, pick a guy that I'd be interested in, he wasn't the greatest. And I would come to court and judge would be like, hey, who's that guy? And I would be like, whoa, how does she know that? And it's like, you know, it was breaking like the stigma of that's bad or you should be doing better. And that's not just the stigma of like, you know, but my own stigma, I guess I should say, is like my own shame that I felt. And she'd say, hey, let's talk about that. And I'd be like, what? And it was almost this form of, for me personally, reparenting, which not only was that helping me, but helping me become the parent I needed to be. And continues to. You know, I didn't have a mom. I didn't have a mom growing up, and then I had lost my mom. So, you know, this, I say this every time I speak, that Family Drug Treatment Court became my family. Still, today. I mean, I graduated Family Drug Treatment Court 9 years ago, and I'm still very connected. The coordinator came to my graduation from UWM in 2021. And that is my family. You know, it's the people who rooted me on and watched me through it all. So, you know, my daughter did come home. She came home in 2014, and it was hard. It was really difficult. And I think that what a lot of people I see today that I work with, it's like, let's just get the systems out of our lives. And I was so grateful to have that support still. You know, the case manager that was there, the lawyer that was a part of my life, and because they were checking in, they were continuing to ask those questions, you know, how's it going? How's your sobriety? You know, how is everything with school? Do you need support around any of these things? Because, you know, my daughter was 5, but it was like I was a brand new mom. You know, and dealing with a 5-year-old, that's a lot of work. It's not just a baby anymore that needs to be fed and sleeping, but a child who's looking to me to keep them alive and nourish them emotionally. And so I got those skills because of the people who believed in me and essentially watched me grow into this parent and continued to help me to be the parent I am today. And much like Adam said, I have the opportunity to do that for the women that I work with today. And so, you know, I work at Meta House. I've been there for 5 years. And not only that, but I sometimes leave this out. When before the pandemic at Family Drug Treatment Court, we would run a support group for the participants before court. Because even, you know, court, it can be hard. You know, even if it's non-traditional, and it doesn't look like it always, you know, but it's kind of this daunting, like there's something hanging over my head. And so to have that support of somebody who's been through it was huge for the parents. And just being able to be there for them was it's always a great reminder for me, you know, and where I've come from, and I get to share my story, and I have to do that today, you know. April 19th, this last April 19th, I just celebrated 8 years of sobriety, and I couldn't even, you know. Yeah, we do a lot of clapping in treatment court. Yeah, we congratulate each other on the milestones, no matter how big or small. My daughter is about to graduate middle school and go into high school. I'm like really emotional about her today. I don't know what's going on, but that's my baby, you know, and I get to do for her what was never done for me. I get to do for me what I never thought I could do for me. And it's because the people believed in me, because of the professionals believed in me. And I say it with quotes because they were people too, and they showed me they were people too. I didn't look at the judge and say, oh, there's the judge. I call her Judge T because that's what I always know her as, but I didn't say, oh, there's the judge. It was, there, you know, there's Judge Triggiano, like she is a person. There's my lawyer, he's a person. These people are people, they're humans like me, and they believe in that. They believe that I am human. Yeah, I feel like there was one more thing I was gonna say and I lost it, but yeah, I'm grateful that you guys are here and willing to listen to the stories, because that's what makes the difference, you know, and we get to pass this along to our communities and be a part of the real change that makes a difference. So I'm grateful that you guys are here tonight. Good, that's what I'm here for.
I got mascara on. Hey everybody. I'm really nervous. I have to put that out there. I'm really nervous. But where do I start? I'm Janisha. Okay. I'm gonna get up here. Okay. My name is Janisha. I'm a mother of 7 kids, 6 living, 1 deceased. Where do I begin? I want to begin with saying I want to talk about historical trauma. I am a child of the system. My mother was a child of the system, and the historical trauma of that. So then it passed on and passed on. So then I started doing drugs with my mom, because that's all we knew. Like, we didn't know anything else. We wasn't taught anything different. And I ended up in a domestic violence relationship, as my mother did. Everything like my mother. And I love my mama to this day. And I'm like one of those optimistic people, like, I like to believe that everything that I went through, everything that I have gone through and going through to this day is for a reason. It's a purpose. It's the reason why I'm here today talking to all of you. It's the reason why I'm a parent partner for WellPoint. It's the reason why I graduated from FDTC. It's the reason why Judge Triggiano was put in my life. It's reasons to this. And I believe that's why I'm sitting here right now. So just had to put that out there. I'm optimistic. That's to say that I don't look at everything that I went to as a bad thing anymore. I look at it as this is a good thing, because now I can relate to other people in the community and help them go through their process, give them guidance, and walk alongside them, which is my job description at WellPoint. So FDTC, what can I say? The best place you could ever think of, the best place that you could ever think of, at least for me. When I went to Judge Triggiano, what I can remember is sitting in the back of the courtroom with my hoodie up. Every time Judge Triggiano used to just look at me, like, oh, there she go. And I was like, well, I came, you know. I came. No, didn't work. That's why I was stuck in phase 2 for about 6-7 months. Because I just stayed there and I was just sitting there. Where do I go from here? I don't know. What is my story? I have a whole bunch of stories. Oh, the methadone. So I am a recovering heroin addict. I was on methadone when I was in drug treatment court. And I remember this one time, I was so proud of myself. I thought I had this big idea. There go me being optimistic again. I told Judge Triggiano, she called me up, she said, what's going on? And then I was like, Judge Triggiano, I'm gonna get off methadone today on 80 milligrams. 80 milligrams is a high milligram just to get off, and think that I didn't know about withdrawals. I didn't know anything of that. So then I knew of withdrawals from heroin, but not withdrawals from methadone. Then I did it. No. Then Judge Triggiano was like, I don't think that's a good idea. Medical, you should talk to a doctor. And I'm like, in my head I'm thinking like, nah, she don't know what she talking about. This is my judge though. Like, she cared enough to say that to me. Like, she cared enough. She didn't agree with me. She didn't just let me, or she did just let me go out there and do it because I was gonna do it anyways. But she did not just say, oh, didn't care. She just said what she said, and she was right. She was definitely right. Like, cause I came back to court, didn't use, but I was going through withdrawals. I was hot. I was cold. Stomach was hurting, back was aching, everything was wrong. And she was looking at me, and she could tell, I know she could tell, but I went back to the methadone clinic, and they dropped me from 80 milligrams. I went back 2 weeks later because I couldn't take it no more. I was just like, oh no. And I went back. I was on 80 milligrams, they dropped me down to 20. So from there, I was able to wing off and be where I wanted to be. But the whole process, I should have listened. I should have listened in the first place. I would never have to go through all of that pain. My kids, everything that I put my kids through in life, is madness. It's like, wow, they had to see their mom just down and out, going through all of that. And I'm so proud that FDTC helped me get to the place where I needed to be. So now they see that their mother is now successful and helping other parents. And that doesn't mean it changed their attitudes, but I'm proud of myself that they can see that I'm trying to change the way my past was. So I'm trying to change everything. Like, that's why I work for WellPoint. is for systematic and systemic racism. I'm trying to change the whole system, and I'm implementing what FDTC has installed inside of me into the system. And it's not just me. I work for PSP, which is Parents Supporting Parents. It's an evidence-based practice in Iowa. I'm sorry. Where else do I go? Healthy Infant Court. Yeah, there you go. So my son, Ja'Cory, he was taken from me from the hospital. Traumatic event. I ain't ever had a baby taken away from me in the hospital. And when he got into foster care, I also practiced this thing called shared parenting. Ooh, I got a big story for y'all. I practiced something called shared parenting. So again, I have 7 children. I gave one of my sons up for adoption to the family that took my kid in, my baby that was in Healthy Infant Court. I gave my son up for adoption because I knew I had to love my child more than I loved myself. I had to look at what he got out of where he was staying. So they love him. I love him. And we both recognized that. We came together, and now we do shared parenting. I watch their other kids that they adopted, and we just do it all together, family dinners, all of those things. And Healthy Infant Court was what helped us get to that point. I had a nurse, her name was Katie, her name is Katie, I love Katie. And she came in and she showed me everything that I needed to see, like what I wasn't doing. Like, I didn't know how to parent. I wasn't parent properly. I didn't know what I was doing. So she showed me how to communicate with my child and how baby cues, that's what they're called. She taught me baby cues, and I was able to actually use those. Healthy Infant Court, I didn't know I was doing Healthy Infant Court. I found out after I did it, but I graduated, so it was cool. Healthy Infant Court, it's a big thing. Like, now that I am working in the system, I actually refer, I call people like, can we get hooked up with FDTC or, drug treatment court, or can we get hooked up with Healthy Infant Court? Because I feel like this is the only way that my parents can succeed until the system change as far as, restorative justice.
Boy, I just want to thank you all. These were such believed you and supported you are real, role models for all of us, truly. I think it's time that we could have some questions from all of you. I have one that I'm going to start out with for Judge Triggiano. And that is that there's a lot of talk about, soft on crime, and that being soft on crime endangers all of us. And I imagine you may have heard that, or I'm wondering if you've heard that about restorative justice. And if so, what you would respond, how you'd respond.
I have a lot of different things to say about that. So, 19 years in the system, and I hear on one end you're too tough on crime, and then I hear on the other end you're too soft on crime, and I've always tried to drown out both sides and try to see what works for families, try to see what works for individuals who come to us so that we don't see them back again. I mean, the whole point is, right, trying to get families and parents and kids stronger so they stay out of the system. I want to be put out of business. Even though now I'm retiring and I can go do something else. But Restorative justice is a different way of doing justice, right? It can be in addition to the traditional system. It can be in lieu of the traditional system. But it has to be looked at as a different way of doing things that can be more beneficial. And you can see from the example I gave you about Kendrick, I never saw Kendrick back again. To this day, I don't believe he's back in the system, and he's, you know, working a job, he's got family, et cetera. Same with Adam, right? Adam had an eye-opening experience when he could understand the impact of what he did on the other person. And up until then, you know, it was all about woe is me, right? And so it gives us that opportunity to do something different.
Are there any other questions? Okay.
Judge, how do you determine which offenders are contenders to go through through the program, restorative justice program?
Yeah, so back when I was doing restorative justice before I ended up downtown and doing other stuff, and I left children's court, mostly our focus was on property crimes and low risk, low needs individuals, right? Sometimes we do high risk needs individuals, but you wanted to be careful about that. And you wanted to be able to make sure that people accepted restorative justice practices, so you weren't going to start out necessarily with a homicide case, right? Most of those you see when people are already in the system, in prison, and then like with Adam, then you do circles for those who are institutionalized. But we focused mostly on property crimes. I think we can expand what we're doing, and I'm hoping to do that when I direct the Andrews Center and work with the law students to help them work at Children's Court to look at a wider variety of cases. In particular, auto thefts and some nonviolent carjacking cases. So we're trying to expand the focus and cast the net wider in that respect.
Any other questions?
Mine's not exactly a question. I've been a foster parent, and I want Aisha, is that what you said your name was?
Jonisha.
Jonisha. I want to say to you, it's good to hear your side of the story at the base of when the Healthy Infant started, and to go to those meetings. I was one of those people that came to the hospital to steal your child the second day after they were born. And it was an ugly feeling on my side. And I know the parent now has her children back and is doing wonderful, and I'm involved with her. But I want you all to know you're brave, you're strong, and you're doing a great job. And I think you need to hear that over and over and over again, because I'm willing to bet that there are days that still suck. And you know how to fight through those. And maybe you're not going to fight through them as well as you think you should, but you're doing a good job. So thank you for coming here and exposing yourself to all of us and telling us your story.
I would just add, and thank you for your response and comment. Restorative justice and family drug treatment court and healthy infant court were a way for us to help reconnect foster parents and parents, right? Because what you said is, you know, you're the one that comes and steals the child, right? That's what you were looked at, and that's a hard label to take, right? Especially when that wasn't your goal. So the whole thing is trying to create dialogue around a healthier way to have foster parents work with birth parents, because that's the best for the child. Not in every situation. There's some situations where that just isn't going to work and we shouldn't try it, but at least have the conversation about trying to connect those dots.
Can I say something to her? Can I say something to? I also want to. Everybody should be in a circle like FDTC. We had the judge, we had the lawyer, we had the GAL, we had the case manager. Everybody was in communication with each other. We had the foster parent. We had everybody in communication with each other. I forgot what I was going to say, but I know shared parenting is very, very important. I mean, like, they also took care of my other son, so my son still called him mama, and it's just like that family piece is very, very important. Oh, thank God.
I have a question and kind of something to say. My first question is drug treatment court and family drug treatment court, are those two different things? Or it's the same thing?
So there's an adult drug treatment court that started about 25 years ago, and that is focused on the adult criminal justice system. Right now, Judge Carolina Stark is the presiding judge over the adult drug treatment court. It also has the Veterans Treatment Court, a pilot mental health treatment court, and I'm probably missing one, all out of the adult side system. Family drug treatment court is different, operates under similar principles and best practices, but family drug treatment court is in the child welfare system, and so is healthy infant court. Separate judges, separate teams, separate focus, but all of the treatment courts are doing really, really well in Milwaukee, having put in a lot of time and effort and best practices. We get really, really good outcomes in our courts.
Okay, so I guess I'll say, I'm glad you cleared that up for me.
Sure.
As a young person, I actually interned at the courthouse in drug treatment court. My grandma was the stenographer for Judge Donald, and so I spent a lot of time shuffling back and forth through courtrooms, seeing things as a young person. And I'm really thankful that this restorative justice piece has been added, because it was cold. It was often a cold space to be, and something that was difficult for people who look like me to navigate through. So I'm incredibly happy to hear that this is where we're headed, and happy to hear the stories that you all have shared, and happy and proud of you that you've been able to transcend some of your transgressions or the things that have happened to you. And so, Janisha, did I say it right, Janisha? Listen, I understand sometimes trying to tell your story is hard, because there's so many pieces of your story that hurt. So I'm thankful that you were able to share the pieces that you were comfortable with.
I agree.
Question. I imagine that since both parties are willing participants, the success rate is pretty high, but I'm wondering if you have a sense at all about what percentage of these cases are successful through restorative justice series. And I'm also wondering whether, if you do these sort of talks regularly, whether you involve victims, like in the case of, in Adam's case or similar cases like that, whether victims are ever part of the panel.
Great question. So there's about 3 slides I didn't include because we didn't have time on the outcomes around reunification, guardianship, time to reunification, because one of the biggest things is you want, if kids are removed from their parental home, you want to get them back safe as soon as you can. And so the Family Drug Treatment Court and Healthy Infant Court cuts off a percentage of that length of time because of the work that these parents do. But I don't have it here, but the outcomes are really good. If you want to give me your name, I can send you some of the information on the outcomes. But on all fronts, the outcomes are really good for family drug treatment and healthy infant court. if we stay true to best practices, and we have painfully stayed really close and true to best practices for those that are found to be evidence-based and driven by data. So, trying to remember your second question. Yeah. No, but I suspect that when I get over to the Andrews Center, we'll be doing more events and more potential circles and panel discussions, and we may do that. This is the first time we've included Adam in this conversation with the Family Drug Treatment Court, and you lived up to our expectations. You did a great job. But mostly, and this is the first time we've included problem-solving courts with restorative justice, because we don't do circles, or we're looking at doing more embedded restorative justice work in family drug treatment court. So if you have parents who are estranged from their children and their grandchildren because the parents either had to say, I can't do this anymore, you know, like I think a lot of times people with substance use disorder really destroy family relationships, right? So can we do more restorative justice circles with family members, right? To help support healthier family relationships, we may look at doing that. But most of the time when us three talk, it's always focused on our problem-solving courts, the Family Drug Treatment Court and Healthy Infant Court. So I'm just trying to bring in more restorative practices into those courts, if that makes any sense.
I'll just use the opportunity to give a plug for our next session, which is 2 weeks from today, same time, same place. And it will be also on how restorative justice impacts victims and the community. So there are kind of the three legs of the stool.
Maybe one more question. Could you give us maybe a view of the scale of the problem, the size of the problem? So do we have enough judges? Do we have enough resources in relation to how big the problem is, the demand is? Yeah.
That's a great question. How do I answer that? So in February 10th, 2020, I became chief judge because then Maxine White, who was our chief judge, was appointed to the Court of Appeals. 30 days later, I shut the courts down. That's been my claim to fame. Because of the pandemic. And we've been struggling ever since to get back up and running to do what we need to do, especially in our problem-solving courts. And certainly any restorative justice work that we did in circles and nobody was meeting, right? So all of those treatment courts that thrived on community coming together, all of restorative justice practice that thrive and grow on people coming together couldn't happen. All of the work that we did in Family Drug Treatment Court relies on a supportive community network of service providers that can help people with substance use disorders, mental illness, domestic violence, mental health issues. And so all of those people shut down. And so we're still recovering from a lot of that. The justice system right now, if you look at everybody, and I know my dear friend Danita Walsh, the sheriff, they're down 30 to 40% in their staffing. The court system, the lawyers, were down 30 to 40%. We have enough judges, but we don't have enough other support systems to do the work we need to do in any of the courts. So from that standpoint, no, we don't have enough resources. To expand the treatment courts, to create a restorative justice court, mind you, if we do decide to do something like that, you need additional people. We don't have that. So we kick and scream and scrap and write grants and beg for money from the state and using American Relief Plan Act dollars just to keep going on what we're doing right now. But we believe in it. We believe there's better outcomes when you use restorative justice practices in certain settings. We believe the treatment courts need to expand and grow, and so everyone in the system will continue to scrap to figure that out. And here's where community comes in, right? Helping us support that and looking for ways to help us do that is going to be really important. Sure. Sure.
When I lived in another state, I served on the Youth Service Bureau, and there was an increasing trend of children being directed into the criminal justice system by the school system. What is the status of that in Wisconsin, and particularly Milwaukee?
So you're talking a little bit about the school to justice pipeline, as we call it, right? I don't know where it's at. I'm certain that some of the youth crime and issues going on is because school shut down during the pandemic, right? And a lot of those students didn't end up back into the schools, or they ended up in other schools. So it was chaos, which I'm sure is driving some of the youth crime right now. I'm hopeful that with all the people who are really trying in good faith to figure all this out, creating credible messengers and mentoring programs and getting kids back in school and trying to figure other ways where you don't have to actually charge a child with a crime. You can do a consent decree or deferred prosecution agreement so long as they get some supportive services, and maybe restorative justice will be really, really helpful for some kids. But right now, I know we're experiencing the justice system arise in pretty violent crimes associated with our youth. For my 9 years at Children's Court, I saw one youth who committed a homicide. Similar to what happened with Adam in terms of what took place. Right now, there are at least 10 youth who have been charged with homicide in some fashion, either by guns or cars, that are in the secure detention facility or in downtown criminal justice system. There are a lot of things happening with our youth that we really need to help and support them so that we can turn that around. But again, everyone's struggling, so the more support our youth get, the better off we'll be.
We have another question here, and I don't know when you want to cut this off.
Let's just make the last one.
How many law schools teach lessons like this?
That's a really good question. So we have 2 law schools in the state of Wisconsin. And what's your name? Annie?
Yeah.
And you come and talk to me later. We'll get you set up to go to law school, okay? Serious. We have 2 law schools in the state of Wisconsin. One is in Madison. It's UW-Wisconsin-Madison Law School. And then we have Marquette University Law School. Both of them teach restorative justice. Marquette now has a center that's going to, I get to work with students and run a clinical, and I get to teach, and we get to work with the community. And then Madison also has a pretty robust restorative justice program, and they work a lot in the prisons and in the jails and trying to help people. There's some law schools across the country that do that, and then there's some that teach on problem-solving courts, what Robin and Janisha were talking about. But I think there should be more doing it, right? Don't you? That's a great question. Thank you for asking that.
Okay, I think we're out of time, but I just would like to thank Judge Triggiano, Adam, Robin, and Janisha for sharing these amazing stories. I think that there's a lot to think about here, and I hope that this will encourage us to maybe think differently about criminal justice, maybe challenge some of the established thinking, and have some conversations, start this conversation. But before we end it, let's give them another round of applause. So even though our formal program is over, we do have coffee and cookies, and no one can leave without taking a cookie, just so you know. But they'll be out there, our speakers will be out there, and you can ask other questions to them over some coffee and cookies. So thanks so much for coming, and good night.